Those of you who have followed this channel for a while might know the watches that are discussed the most. The favorite genres, undoubtedly sports and utility watches, with a touch of dress here and there. The purpose, function, design for use, nothing really comes close to pieces that have been built around those characteristics. Just absolutely fantastic. So military spec, field or pilot watches fall into this category well. A series of Smiths pieces arrived on my doorstep from Time Factors, and the aim of the exercise was to really focus on the Navigator, a tribute to the famous Mark 11 pilot's wristwatch that saw a transition from old styling to new, arriving in the nuclear age. That video will be linked in the corner of the screen, and I highly recommend you look at it if you would like some more context. But the other pieces, what are known as the military models, called the PRS-29s, were mainly just there to help add more volume to the new model, add a bit more contrast into the mix. The first model in the group, the W10, absolutely gorgeous. It is going to get its own video and truly deserves the attention that it receives for many reasons. And then the Air Ministry, and by the end of this video I think you'll understand why it is titled An Unexpected Love Affair. It is a watch that is based on a very particular and rare series of Longines and Omega models that were actually assembled post-Second World War. More specifically, they were recased in the early 50s. There are a few distinctions that we will have a look at, and only enthusiasts would really notice the difference between the models. But the original references, like the CK2129 and the CK2292, were made for RAF pilots during the entire period of the Second World War. And nowadays, you can find these vintage models online if you use Air Ministry as a part of the search. And they are seriously collectible. Many fall under the banner name of 30T2 or the common call sign of 6B. If you are on Instagram and you're someone who uses the platform, follow Finest Hour Timepieces and thank me later. The real difference between the original pilot's pieces of the 40s and these later 50s variants is the originals were sized at 32mm, and after the war, these models were recased to a more contemporary 36.5. These particular pieces had some of their dials reworked with a more modern set of numerals and a larger rail dial added around them. What is phenomenal, because these originals never used any form of radioactive isotope lume like radium or tritium on their dials, they have aged incredibly well. Considering that there are watches that are 75 plus years old, we find that the handsets, numerals, all of the minute details are still intact with many of them. What made these models so fantastic, they were able to be mass produced, their movements were newly developed at the time and extremely accurate, and they had characteristics like anti-magnetic properties that made them excellent choices for pilots, since magnetic fields were everywhere in those old aircrafts. Many of you might know that magnetism is probably the most dangerous element that affects watches and their movement accuracies. Nowadays we find that many pieces are standardized with great anti-magnetic properties, but back then this was quite a new development. It's just amazing to consider that these were the cutting-edge tool watches of the time, made to be legible and simple to distinguish. Now, if you were interested in finding a more faithful recreation of those original models used in the 40s, other than finding the vintage pieces, of course, Longines has created what they call the Heritage Military RAF edition. And the models are scaled up ever so slightly. They have faux speckling on their dials with a set of gorgeous heat-blued hands. Vintage inspired, but with a modern touch. I must say, they really do offer a lot of value for the money. And the unique traits, like the hands, dials, and crown, really set it on its own pedestal. So looking to the Smiths Air Ministry, what makes this model so unique? Well, again, it's not so much of a stretch to believe that the services issued Smiths watches to pilots. But even more romantic, wouldn't you believe, clocks inside Supermarine Spitfires back then were made by Smiths. The specifications of the Air Ministry are top-notch, 36.5mm in diameter. With a cream dial, it visually wears larger. It feels more like a 37mm piece. 18mm lug length, large heat-blued spade-styled hands, a semi-dome boxed sapphire crystal, hand-wound ETA 2801 movement, iron cage surrounding it to withstand magnetism, and is 100 meters water resistant. On paper, the watch is a win. But seeing it next to the W10 and the Navigator prototypes on a black strap, it felt very plain, for my eyes at least. And for a time I really didn't pay it much attention. I was drawn to the shiny new Mark 11s and wore them the most. Then put a Phoenix NATO, what we should call a G10, on the W10 and enjoyed wearing it equally as much. They got all of the wrist time and the Air Ministry was left on its black NATO in silence. I had forgotten that I had a few old bracelets that fit 18mm lugs, and one of them was a very special one called a Tetuflex, new old stock, designed in the USA, made in Italy. This combination changed everything. And it really began unlocking the watch's potential in my eyes. Sometimes it's all about finding the best strap or bracelet combination that really does the trick and makes the piece sing to you. One of the most engaging features is noticing how the lugs taper from the case. And the best way to express this character, at least what I've found so far, is putting it on an olive canvas Zulu strap that this piece now lives on. The colours are so complementary, an off-white cream dial, blue of the hands, black of the numerals, and a pale olive. It feels very period correct, and maybe that's why it works so well. Details that are really worth noticing. The blue spade hands deserve attention. Looking up just why watch hands are heat blued, it is a subject that is debated amongst enthusiasts, but many of us know getting the steel to be this colour is an art form. The threshold is very small, and if the hands are overheated, they turn brown. Why were hands blued originally? Well, they do offer some added resistance to corrosion, but primarily it's done as a bragging right. It has, and always will be, artistry, plain and simple. One watchmaker outdoing the next. These hands are just phenomenal, and they complete the dial, adding more visual complexity. How the counterbalance on the seconds hand matches the large spade of the hour hand. They really are the elements that date the watch the most, but also add the most amount of character to the visage. And then the cream dial, just a slight off-white. It's not trying to look aged or patinaed that we see with so many recreations nowadays, like the Longines Heritage Military that was shown earlier. The colour is muted, and most of the time it looks white, but to add emphasis, to really get it to stand out, you need to find a colour that pairs well with it. Olive seems to do the trick. With a steel bracelet, you might have noticed that the dial looks white in most settings. The rail-style minute track represents its time. But what's great is seeing the quarters and how they are emphasized. You don't notice the added thickness to the batons at first, and it takes you by surprise when you see the symmetry shared. The watch itself just wears exceptionally well, low to the wrist, under the radar, but what really sells it to me is the blend of the cream dial and the blued hands. If it was just a simple basic white with standard silver or black hands, it would never have had my attention. There is an X factor to this configuration. So what is it about this watch? This particular watch that feels so special? Honestly, I have been wearing it more than any of the other pieces in my collection over the last 3 weeks. Maybe it's down to the size of it being so ideal, the combination of colours working so well with what I wear and do. But thinking about it harder, there is an emotional connection, a romance. Something that we as watch enthusiasts touch on often is how we feel wearing a watch. And this piece to me really feels like something that could have been given to me by my grandfather. It reminds you of that time in the 40s, that uncertainty, during a time of espionage, covert operations, how these were given to pilots who had 2 steel balls between their legs. But most importantly of all, during such a tumultuous time, when the world really was in complete and utter turmoil, even then, watches, designed for a purpose, were so beautiful and elegant in their execution. It's remarkable, really. I sit back and think about that point the most. So the title of this video, An Unexpected Love Affair, that is perfectly how I would sum up my experience with this piece. It began as one that sat in the corner, virtually neglected, as I foolishly fell for the hot models who batted their eyelids at me and asked to be worn. But the Air Ministry was the watch that I slowly started wearing more and more, and the one that has ultimately outshone the others, because it is a piece that I can just imagine putting on when I'm driving my Beetle, when I ride my old bicycles, wearing drab trousers, something that transports me away from technology, the modernness of everything, and to appreciate something inspired by a different time.